arrested, strip-searched and thrown in jail with common criminals. The arrest of an Indian diplomat has caused the most serious dispute in years between New Delhi and Washington. Is America racist, barbaric, or simply applying the law to protect a housemaid paid less than half the legal minimum wage? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Divya Gopalan. Indian politicians have branded America's treatment of diplomat Devyani Khobragade as shameful and barbaric. She was arrested in New York for allegedly mistreating her nanny by paying her less than the legal minimum wage. Now, victims' rights groups say Khobragade's detention demonstrates that the United States regards the exploitation of domestic workers seriously. But for India, it is a matter of dignity and respect, and there's no sign of an end to this dispute. We'll be going to our guests in just a moment, but first, Nidhi Dutt has this update from New Delhi.
The diplomatic crisis between India and the United States continues to dominate headlines here in India. It has been big news all week. And given the enormity of it, given the amount of attention that it's receiving, it's interesting to look at the key points of focus, of debate and discussion here in India. And there are two key points in particular. Firstly, what the government describes as the deplorable treatment of the Deputy Consul General by American authorities in New York City. She was detained on the 12th of December in New York City, and so that treatment, what happened to her during that detention and time of arrest is certainly played out quite heavily in the Indian media, and it's been viewed quite substantially as the humiliation of the nation. That's certainly the way it's been billed by the networks, by newspapers, and that's dominated the discussion here. And secondly, given all of this, the government's response. What's the government doing to keep up the pressure on Washington? Is it being strong enough? Is its response hard enough, given what Indians describe as the severity of the incident that's taken place? Interestingly, though, we should look at perhaps something that's not being highlighted or covered as much as it should be or as much as it is in the United States, and that's the crime itself. Now, the Deputy Consul General of India in New York City, Devyani Khobragade, is accused by the American authorities of substantially underpaying her nanny. And now this nanny is an Indian woman from India who was working for the family in the United States. That side of the story perhaps isn't receiving as much airtime here. So it's an interesting balance of what's being focused on here in India in relation to this diplomatic breakdown.
Now, to discuss this in New Delhi, we have the former Indian Foreign Secretary Lalit Mansingh. In New York, Joe Becker, who's the Advocacy Director for Human Rights Watch, and joining us on Skype from San Francisco is Atul Singh. He's the founder and editor-in-chief of the global news analysis site Fair Observer. Now, I'd like to speak to Lalit Mansingh first and ask you, what is behind this outrage and this uproar in India? What about this case has got such a reaction?
Well, yes, I think there are two issues here and we shouldn't confuse them. One is diplomatic behavior and the other is a legal dispute between an employer and an employee. So far, what we've been commenting on is diplomatic behavior. Now, the United States, along with 186 other states, has signed the Vienna Convention. The question is, does the United States have the right to unilaterally flout this convention and claim that it doesn't apply to the United States? This is our issue. The Vienna Convention says that a consular representative has to be treated with due respect. And Article 40 says that the receiving state must take every possible measure to protect the life, the freedom and the dignity of the consular agent. The simple question is, the American authorities in New York violated all these three provisions in Article 40. And this is the cause of the outrage. You may have a dispute with an employee and it can be questioned. There may be a case of fraud here. We haven't come to that. That's for a court of law to decide. What we are objecting to is the manner in which it was done. This lady was handcuffed when she was dropping her kids to school and subjected to cavity search, strip search, and put in a cell with drug addicts and other criminals. Is this the way to deal with diplomatic and consular representatives?
Okay, let's put this question to Joe Becker. Her treatment has been called barbaric, as we heard Lalit Mansingh say. He's asking the question, is this way a member of India's diplomatic crew should be treated? What is your take on this? Have her rights been violated?
Well, I think the U.S. pursuing this case is sending a very important message that no one, not even a diplomat, is above the law. And the real focus here should not be on the arrest of the diplomat, but the crime itself, which is the exploitation of her domestic worker. The diplomat is alleged to have committed visa fraud by stating that she was paying the domestic worker far more than she actually received in reality. And the domestic worker has also said that she was forced to work far in excess of the 40 hours a week that it was in her contract.
If I just bring it back to the
kind of
treatment of
Sure.
Khobragade and how she was treated, we will get to the domestic worker and her case in a moment.
Sure.
But if I could get to how she was arrested and just bring up the points that Lalit Mansingh brought up, what is your take on this as a human rights observer?
Sure. Well, there are a couple of things here. One is that some of the allegations that were initially made about her treatment have been disputed by U.S. authorities. U.S. authorities say that she was not arrested in front of her children, that she was not handcuffed, and she was given ample time to arrange childcare. It's true that she was strip searched. This is humiliating for anyone, even in the United States, where it's very common in a felony arrest. In India, where it's not common, it's completely understandable that people would be shocked by this. But U.S. law enforcement have said that the diplomat has not been treated any differently than others who have been charged with similar felonies.
All right, let's bring you in, Atul Singh. What do you think is behind the reaction in India?
Well, having lived in both countries, I think the question turns on the definition of due respect. Now, Lalit Mansingh perceives due respect to have been broken because the diplomat was treated harshly. Now, in the light of the norms of behavior of, let's say, even France, this would be considered harsh, because remember, the French were shocked when Dominique Strauss-Kahn was arrested and handcuffed. And they felt, how could a person of such stature and such diplomatic immunity could be treated that way? Now, in the US, this is standard procedure. And so by their light, they did show due respect. However, in India, the people in power, especially the political and bureaucratic elite, they are practically above the law. So their due respect has certainly not been shown, because you're coming from the mindset of a society wherein you never do this to anyone in the civil services, and especially to a diplomat. So as far as India is concerned, their sensibilities are offended, and they perceive it as a slight to the entire nation state. So the whole idea turns on how you perceive due respect to be, because the definitions are not all that clear. And as far as the US is concerned, they followed standard procedure and they showed due respect. Now, the argument to be had here is that the American law and order procedures themselves are excessive. They are not proportional. They are disproportional. They over-rely on the use of force. And that is something that's an opinion that I hold. However, unless you change US procedures per se, you cannot without that, you cannot expect them to treat anyone differentially, especially in a case of fraud.
Now, Atul, your point of due respect can be brought out in the following reactions. The treatment of Khobragade has provoked a lot of anger in the streets of India, and this is how people there have reacted.
No
country can accept that a diplomat is handcuffed first and then locked up in prison with other criminals and thereafter strip searched. In fact, India should never accept this, as it is a very great nation.
They have humiliated the culture of our country and that of women. The foreign minister didn't take strict actions against them. We oppose that and we have burnt his effigy. We want an immediate inquiry against the US, otherwise people of this country will not forgive the government.
America has confused us with Pakistan. They're confused that they can carry on attacking us like they conduct drone attacks on Pakistan.
But Indian Americans have a slightly different take on this case.
What she might have done is probably a crime as per the law of this land. Maybe the treatment was bad for a diplomat because diplomats have certain rights, right? I mean, probably that's not the way to treat a diplomat, but whatever she has done is probably wrong and it has to be kind of dealt with.
The way she was handcuffed is not a right way. They should have gone to the house and do it systematically, dignified way.
She should be arrested. The treatment was rough, but I guess she should be questioned and arrested. I mean, stay legal is what I would say to her. She's not from here. Stay within the law.
Now, the Parliamentary Affairs Minister in India had mentioned that this is not the way a country like India can be treated anymore, perhaps stating that India's status in the world has moved up. Lalit Mansingh, how much of this is now India saying that, look, you can't bully us, we are a country that is, our stature is now different from what it was years ago, and you cannot treat us like this. Is this what this is about? Is this an underlying factor?
No, no, I don't think we are asking for any exception for India. All we are saying is there is a convention. Both parties are required to treat each other's diplomats with courtesy. It doesn't happen in any other country in the world except in the United States. And the US is clearly following different principles. It is accepting double standards because we had a case in Pakistan where a CIA contractor killed 2 Pakistanis and they locked him up, and it was at the intervention of President Obama. They gave him diplomatic immunity and ordered him released. Now, is this how you deal with law in different countries? All we are saying is we treat your diplomats with respect. You do the same thing for us. This is a legal dispute. Now, every case of fraud doesn't mean that you handcuff the person concerned, lock them up, strip search them and put them in a cell. How would the Americans react if we did that to a woman deputy consul general of the United States posted in India? How would that work out in the American media and in the American government circles? All we are asking is respect a convention to which both countries have adhered to.
Atul Singh, from someone who's been on both sides of both countries, is this right? Does the US have double standards?
Well, of course the US has double standards, but so does India. Every country in the world has double standards. And I almost start laughing when I see the apoplectic rage in India, manufactured rage, as I call it, about a diplomat. I mean, we don't care in India if soldiers are beheaded. We don't care about a number of more important issues, whether it is Afghanistan, whether it is encroachment of territory by the Chinese. The point is, this issue could have been dealt with on the Indian side with much greater finesse, behind the scenes. The US didn't create a song and dance publicly when its contractor in Pakistan had to be given diplomatic immunity. They basically did it behind the scenes. They didn't throw a tantrum. The Indians are acting with characteristic immaturity because A, the political establishment is illiterate when it comes to foreign policy. B, there is this electoral compulsion wherein everyone has to beat their chest and out-thump the table so as to show they are more nationalistic than the other. C, no one has any substantive say on real and more important issues, whether it is the collapse of Indian military, whether it is the collapse of our intelligence, or whether it is just having a mere 700 people as diplomats. So I think there are bigger issues for Indians to focus on. There are better ways to raise this issue, and India is acting with a maturity that doesn't behove a great power. If it wants to be a great power, it's got to wise up. It's got to grow up.
Joe Becker, I want to bring you into the point you were making earlier. And as you said, in all this furor, we've heard Indians rise up in defense of how their diplomat was treated. But how much are we hearing from all around about how her domestic worker, who was allegedly wrong, treated?
Yeah, unfortunately, we're not hearing very much at all about the treatment of the domestic worker. All of the attention is focused on this uproar over the arrest of the diplomat. But the domestic worker has been exploited. She's been vastly underpaid, overworked. And this is not an isolated incident. There have been dozens of cases reported to State Department from domestic workers who work for diplomatic personnel in the United States who have complained of a whole range of abuses, unpaid wages, beatings, other physical abuse. There was a case of a domestic worker for a Kuwaiti diplomat who said that her employer raped her repeatedly. The fact that these diplomats have immunity makes it even harder for these domestic workers to get justice for this mistreatment. In very few cases are there actual prosecutions. There have been some civil cases where juries or judges have awarded penalties, and the diplomat typically does not pay and leaves the country instead.
Mm-hmm. Lalit Mansingh, hearing that, and the Indian government has said this is a matter for the Indian government, would the Indian government have really addressed a domestic worker in a diplomat's house being underpaid? And why is there no focus on the plight of the domestic worker?
I think there is a case of different interpretations of the terms. Now, according to the government of India, the maid is recruited, the government pays for the cost of passage, looks after food and shelter, gives them holiday passages, all medical benefits are transferred. So, in the views of the government of India, we are taking adequate care of the domestic staff. Now, maybe this is not adequate according to American law. All I'm saying is, if this is a judicial dispute, let it be settled in a court of law. But you can't prejudge it and say, well, the rights have been violated, so let's arrest a diplomat and set an example. I don't think American judicial system works on this basis of prejudging a crime before it is tried.
Okay, let me in that case bring in Joe Becker and ask her your reaction to that.
Well, the allegations have been made, and it's true that they need to be tried in a court of law. But clearly, U.S. prosecutors had good reason to believe that crimes had been committed here. And they should, and it's a good thing that they've pursued this case. Human Rights Watch has investigated abuses against domestic workers all over the world. And women who travel from one country to another to work as domestic workers are some of the most vulnerable women in the world. They leave their home, their families far behind. They are often under the complete control of their employer. In this case, with diplomatic personnel, if they leave their job, they often have to go back home. Their visa is controlled by their employer. So they're really at the mercy of their employer. And what we've seen are grave abuses again and again and again. Women locked in their homes, their passports confiscated, beatings, physical abuse, overwork. There was a case in Washington of a woman who was forced to work 126 hours a week without any pay whatsoever. The cases that are reported are just a tip of the iceberg. And so, you know, when there are credible allegations of mistreatment, exploitation, that needs to be pursued.
Okay. I want to bring in another case that got a lot of attention in India more than the US. Devyani Khobragade is not the only high-profile Indian who has claimed to be roughly treated by US officials. Now, in 2009, the former Indian President A.P. Abdul Kalam was taken off a plane and strip-searched at an American airport. And someone who's arguably India's biggest Bollywood actor, Shah Rukh Khan, was also strip-searched and detained twice by American immigration officers. And describing the experience, he said, quote, Whenever I start feeling arrogant about myself, I always take a trip to America. The immigration guys kick the star out of stardom. Atul Singh, how much of this is about American procedure then, or is it more about the way America views people from what they call developing countries, or people from countries they would regard as possibly a threat in some way?
So let's look at certain things that have happened in America post 9/11. First, it is indubitably true that individual liberty has suffered. You see that in the formation of the NSA, you see that in the way people are searched at the airport, and you see that in particular the way minorities, especially with Islamic names, are searched. Now, Shah Rukh, obviously with a name like Shah Rukh and Khan, with a Pathan name, although the poor fellow is 2 feet tall, so he's not quite your Afghan Pathan who is a threat, is going to bear the brunt of it because the way the US system works, he would be perceived as a bigger threat. So first, the point is that liberty of the individual has declined. Second, what has happened is that there is a certain amount of unawareness. It is not so much intention. There is a certain amount of unawareness and lack of training and lack of sophistication at airports. And what happens is that a lot of people get searched, and certain people of certain type get searched more. Mm-hmm. And it lends itself to a perception of racism or a perception of targeting of foreigners. In reality, what the people at the airports are doing are just trying to do their job.
Lalit Mansingh, if we just move this forward and look at the bigger picture, is this really worth India risking its relationships and ties with what could be one of the biggest superpowers of the world and also one of its biggest trading partners?
Well, I don't think this is going to affect our strategic partnership. That is not the issue. The issue is how many times, how many times are we going to have this kind of incident happen? This is the third incident of its kind in New York. The question we are asking is, this is not happening in Washington, this is not happening in San Francisco or in Atlanta. 3 cases in recent times in New York. Is this only America and only New York? The message I'm getting is diplomats abuse their staff, therefore this must be credible. I find it difficult to believe that you can argue that before a case is tried, you have already decided that these are people who need to be punished. Now, the strategic ties should not be touched because both sides gain from it.
All right, and
so
can I
don't
ask
think
you,
this is a matter in which,
India has since moved Khobragade to another location, given her full diplomatic immunity. What is it doing for the domestic worker?
There's a case in the High Court of Delhi, but the authorities in New York seem to have ignored the High Court's action, and they're proceeding with their own method of trying the case. I think we are helpless in this matter because both the parties are in New York, and I take it that the legal action will have to be in New York.
And Joe, is that good enough?
The Indian government needs to spend far less time focused on the treatment of the diplomat and really focus its attention on ensuring that Indian nationals who work as domestic workers are treated fairly with respect for their human rights. We need stronger laws in India to protect domestic workers and stronger instructions from the Indian government to their diplomats to ensure that they follow the law and treat their employees with the rights that they are entitled to.
Okay, thank you very much.
Right.
That was a very interesting discussion, plenty to talk about. I'd like to thank all of our guests on this edition of Inside Story. In New Delhi, we have the former Foreign Secretary Lalit Mansingh. In New York, Joe Becker, the Director for Human Rights Watch. And from San Francisco, Atul Singh. And if you want to send us your feedback by email, send it to insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks again for watching. Goodbye for now.